So what is IAM? IAM is simply the identity engine of AWS. For this video, I'll break down IAM and demonstrate how to use IAM in AWS. As I mentioned earlier, IAM is the identity engine of AWS. The I stand for identity, A stand for access, and M stand for management. So with AWS identity and access management, you can specify who and what can access services and resources in AWS, and you can really narrow down the permission a user or a group has over a resource. So now let's break this down. In IAM, we have the who and policy. The who comprises of users, groups, and roles. And the policy comprises of set of resources permissions. For example, full access permission to an S3 bucket. With this permission, you can access, write, update, and create resources in S3. Another example is EC2 read-only access. With this permission, you can view EC2 instances, but you cannot start or stop instances. So to put it all together, we can give a user, a group or role access to resources in AWS using IAM. Right, let's jump on to the Amazon console. So as you can see from the top right, the region is Northern Virginia. So to go to IAM, let's click on services and then scroll down to security, identity, and compliance. Once we click on this option, we should see IAM in the blade. So click on IAM and that should load up the identity and access management of the console. So now, if you now look back to the top right, you notice that has changed to global. This indicates that the IAM services or resources is actually a global service. So it's not, you don't really save your users into a specific location. It's more like a globalized service. So once we are in the IAM session, we have a lot of options. We have the ability to create a user group, users, roles, policies, identity providers. For this video, we're going to focus on creating users, groups, and roles. First of all, let's explore the users. So once you go to the user object, this is where you create your unique user. I already have existing users here. So as you can see, you have the username, the group they fall into, and when they have any sort of activity or login, you should be able to see it here as well. And it can tell you how old the password and everything is. So this is very crucial for security purposes. You don't need to keep password for that long. You need to have some password policies to rotate your password. Right. So let's create a user. It's very simple to create a user here. All you need to do is click on add users, and then you can simply type in your user name. So I'll give the name as user2. And under the access type, you have the option to create access keys and password. The access keys is used for logging into the CLI, or if you have an API, you can use access key for that purposes. Also for SDKs as well and other developmental tools. For password is for management in terms of the console access. So for this example, I'm just going to give user2 a password. So I'll select the password and I can set it to auto generate, or I can create my custom password. So I'm just going to create a custom password. So this will give me the option to input my own password. So I'll paste my password in here and click on next. But before I click on next, you can see here that this password will give the option to reset password on first login. But I don't want that, so I can easily uncheck that option. But for production environment, more likely you might want to select that option. So I'll click on next, and then in this next page, I get the option to add my user to a group. Because this one is a test environment, I'm not going to add the user to a group. We'll add that user to a group later on. So I'll click on next the tag, and I can add up to 50 tags. So I'll move on to the next, and then I'll have the option to add permission if I want to. But as you can see here, most often when you're creating a user, it's not really advisable to attach permission directly to the user. The recommended approach is to add a user to a group that have permission already bound to it. So I'll click on create user, and this will go ahead and create my user. So as you can see, the user has been created successfully. Now let's close this and go back to the dashboard. So this will take us back to the main identity and access management dashboard. Here my new user has been created successfully, and I can easily log on to this user. But at the moment, the user has no permission, and it doesn't belong to any group that has permission attached to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another group. So to create a group is quite simple as well. You just go to the left side and then click on user groups. So as you can see here, under user groups, I already have two existing user groups, HR and system admins. So to create a group, all I need to do is click on create group and then give the group a name. So for this group, I'll name it as support team. And right from the back, I get the option to select the users I want to add to this specific group. I'm not going to add any group to it. And you also have the option to attach permissions. So as you can see here, this is also optional, and there is about 800 permissions policies, and these are more like policies that are by default given by AWS. And the way you find these out is these are AWS managed policies, and you can also see the AWS icon next to the policy name. So that will indicate that that's a policy created by AWS. We will create our own policy, and you see the clear difference between a policy that we create and also a policy that AWS has created on our behalf. And AWS have a lot of policy that covers almost everything you can really think of. So most often you can search for whatever policy you want and you should find it. So if I type in S3, for example, I can get policy that are associated with S3. The same thing applies to any other service that you might type in. So I can easily just remove this. So for this, I'm just going to give it a group name. I'm not going to attach any users or policy to it yet. So now let's go to create group. So as you can see here, basically with the creation of a group name, we are bound to ensure that there is no spaces in between. So I'll just remove the space in here and scroll to the bottom and click on create group, and it should now create the group for me. And as you can clearly see from the user field, it has no users and there's no permission defined yet. And you can see the group was just created. So let's quickly jump onto that group we just created. And now we can look at the permissions and add a permission to it if you want to. We can also go to the access advisor, and this will give us more information about the last time we used this specific group, or if the group is attached to a specific permission, we can see when that service or when this group was used to access those permissions and by who as well. So now let's quickly jump on to policies. So as we had a look at the user groups, we got to a point where we're looking at the policy session. So with the policies, these are the ones created by AWS by default, but we can create our own policies as well. So to create a policy, we just have to click on create policy. In this section, we can now select the service you want to assign a policies for. So we can drop this one down, and then we can search for those specific services. So there is a lot of services from AWS. So for this test, let's use S3. So let's select S3, and then we have the option to apply all S3 actions, or we can be more specific and select unique access levels. So with these breakdown, we can even go much more granular by clicking on this icon here, and it gives us a bit more breakdown list of what we want to have access to. So you can really go granular when it comes to selecting the access level. But as an example, I'll just select all S3 actions for now. And let's go to resources. So the resources will be what we want to really access. So this will come down to, do you want access to the S3 bucket? Do you want access to a specific job? And many more. So another key point is that you can even restrict it to what we call the ARN, which is Amazon resource name. So each resource created on Amazon have a unique name. So we can narrow it down, and let's say if you have a specific bucket that we want to tie to this specific policy, then we can put in that ARN name in here. So that means only this resource will be accessible using this specific policy. So whoever you give this policy to can only access that RAN service you have. But what we're going to do is we're just going to allow all resources. And then for the next part, we have the option to create some request conditions. So the request condition is more about having some kind of like a policy around how we can access those resources. You can tie it to a specific IP address, or you can set up an MFA. So MFA will be multi-factor authentication. So if a user try to log into this service, then they need to have a multi-factor authentication to be able to access it. And also you can tie it to a specific IP address. So only users specific IP address will have access to this service. Right, we're not going to do any of that. So we will add an extra permissions as well. So the key point is that creating your own policy document, you can literally add more permissions if you want to. So what we'll do is I'll click on add another permission. Then we can select another service. So in this instance, I'll select EC2, and with this, I'm not going to select all the services. I can just select one access level like lists and read. And then that means any user or any group that have this specific policy document, they will not have the option to, let's say, manage the resources or do any form of writing or tagging. The only permission that they have is list and read. So that means they should be able to list, let's say, EC2 instances, or be able to see and read the EC2 instances. We can even go into it to see what these permissions are. So these are what they get when they have the read permission. And this is what they get when they have the list permission. So you can look into it and even remove the ones that you don't want as well. Right, so likewise, we have the option to add a condition access as well, MFA and also source IP, just like the first resource policy we created. So I'll leave this one blank, and then we can move on to next, which is tag. For tag, I'll leave that one empty, and then we can click on next to review. So in this section, we can now add the policy document name. So like the group object, there shouldn't be any spacing between the naming scheme. I'll just name this one as Kofi policy, just to keep it simple. And then I will simply click on create policy. Right, so this has been created successfully. So as you can see, the difference is crystal clear. This one have a box icon, and the one I manually created has no box icon, and you can see the type is different. This one is a customer managed policy, and the rest are AWS managed policies. So these are a way you can distinguish between policy created by customers and policies that are created by default by AWS. Right, so now we've created a user group. We also created a user, and now you've created a policy as well. So we can now put all of them together. So to do so, what I'm going to do is, right, let's navigate to the user group. This is where we're going to put everything together. We're going to tie our user to the user group we created, the support team, and also the policy we created to this group. So that means the users that are in this user group will have access to the policy we created, which is Kofi policy. So let's click on the support team, and then let's go to the user blade and then click on add user. And in here we can add user to, actually let's add user 1 as well, because these have no group association. So we can add them, add users, and that's about it. The users have been added successfully. And then we can add a permission as well by clicking on the permission tab, and equally click on add permissions here. And then we can now attach permission and select the permission we created and add the permission. Okay, so that's about it. So now this group has 2 users and 1 policy document. And if we click on Access Advisor, we should now see our policy there. And you can see that you have access to the S3 service and the policy name, and there's no access yet. So now if we click on, if we access it, let's do an access. So to do so, let's click on the dashboard. This should take it back to the IAM dashboard, and we should have our unique account ID, and also we should have a sign-in link here. So we can use the sign-in link just by clicking on this icon to copy the URL, and then we can easily jump onto this. And now let's log in as user 2. So what I'll do is I'll type in user 2, and then I'll enter the user 2 password and sign in as user 2. Okay, so once we sign in, this user has access to S3, so we should be able to really go into S3. So let's just type in S3, and we can create an S3 bucket because this user have that option too. So user to bucket as an example, and I'll just scroll to the very bottom and just click create bucket. Okay, another thing you have to bear in mind is that the name have to be unique. So let's try to make it as unique as possible. It have to be globally unique, as you can see here. So let's now click on create bucket. Okay, so the bucket is created successfully, and we can also go into EC2, and as you can see with EC2, because we have a limited access, we will not be able to access certain fields. So the same thing applies to IAM. We don't have access to IAM. So if you click on IAM, we get access denied. The only service you have full access to at the moment is the S3. So when we go back to the S3, we can really create any resource that we want. So for a recap, for this video, we learned what is IAM. We walked through how to create users, groups, and policies in AWS. So if this video helped you out, consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.